Hello and thank you for joining us on Newsweek, where we highlight some of the biggest stories that made the headlines in the week. I am Jacinta Obiuku. Today on Newsweek, the death of Queen Elizabeth II, whose rule saw Britain through decades of changes, was felt around the world. The federal government has directed that all flags at government offices in Nigeria and abroad be flown at half-mast on Sunday and Monday in her honor. Also this week, the Department of State Services arrested the former frontline negotiator for the Kaduna-Abuja train attack victims, Tukur Mamu, on Wednesday. Mamu was arrested over his involvement with the terrorists that abducted about 62 passengers of Kaduna-Abuja train more than 5 months ago. Later on the show, we will take a look at recommendations made after the federal government met with vice-chancellors and pro-chancellors of federal universities towards ending the lingering strike by the Academic Staff Union of Universities, ASUU. All the details in a moment. Stay with us. Well, it's the beginning of a new era as King Charles III has been formally proclaimed the United Kingdom's new monarch 2 days after the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. The Queen, the longest reigning monarch in British history, died on Thursday at the age of 96. Details in this report.
The world takes a pause from economic woes and war to witness the beginning of an era in the history of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. Charles III has been proclaimed king at a solemn but elaborate ceremony at St. James's Palace. These historic proceedings have never been seen before on camera. The last time these proceedings took place was in 1952, after the death of the Queen's father, King George VI. It was the decision of King Charles III to allow television cameras into the Accession Council for the first time to allow the public to view proceedings. The accession ceremony saw all 6 leaving former UK Prime Ministers gather to greet the new king and witness the proclamation.
With one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless his majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. God save the king! God save the king!
The king himself was not present for the first part of the meeting when he was proclaimed monarch by the Accession Council made up of senior politicians, judges and officials. Taking an oath to preserve the security of the Church of Scotland, a Presbyterian church that is separate from the Church of England, King Charles III paid tribute to his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, and spoke of the great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty passed to him.
My mother gave an example of lifelong love and of selfless service. My mother's reign was unequaled in its duration, its dedication and its devotion. Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I shall strive to follow the inspiring example I have been set in upholding constitutional government and to seek the peace, harmony and prosperity of the peoples of these islands and of the Commonwealth realms and territories throughout the world.
A royal salute with 3 chairs for His Majesty the King. From St. James's Palace in central London to the Royal Exchange in the City of London, crowds echoed "God Save the King" with the band before giving 3 chairs to His Majesty. Further proclamations will be read out across the country in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales on Sunday.
Welcome back. Joining me now via Zoom to discuss this is the chairman of the British Business Group Nigeria and Global Ambassador of Civets UK, Dr. Amma Onyerima. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
All right. Now, having reigned for 70 years, how would you describe Queen Elizabeth II? How fulfilling was her life?
Well, I will start by saying that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was a remarkable woman. As you said earlier, the longest serving sovereign in the British history, who demonstrated throughout her life her love and devotion to be of service to her family, to the nation, to the Commonwealth, the world, humanity as a whole. I think of her as the quintessential servant leader who led with such humility and integrity and traversed all the trials and tribulations of life with grace and dignity, and demonstrated throughout her life the importance of unity and honoring traditions. And for me, she always reminded me of humanity, as a daughter, as a sister, an auntie, a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother. But there was something about her, if you've ever seen clips of her, which I think all of us have, she had this air of calm and kindness and a regal nature, and yet gentle and reassuring. And I think all of us have seen her ability to communicate verbally and non-verbally through a small gesture that just spoke volumes. And it's incredible to know that within her reign, we had 15 prime ministers, and 3 of them were women. And recently, not even a week ago, we had Liz Truss take on the premiership. And of course, the Queen was there to get this going. So she's a strong advocate of the monarchy in modern times. And I believe that history will look on her impactful legacy with great kindness and her determination for excellence and service. Without a doubt, it will be well represented in history.
All right, she was also the rallying point for the Commonwealth of Nations. Do you see the Commonwealth continuing to thrive under the reign of King Charles III?
Well, I think it will. I mean, the Queen placed great emphasis on the Commonwealth of Nations, which is 56 independent countries, where some of them were former colonies, but they're independent countries, and they represent about 2.5 billion people. And the whole premise of the Commonwealth of Nations is working together for prosperity and democracy and peace. And I think since probably 2018, she slowly sort of guided the transition for then Prince Charles to be actively involved with the Commonwealth of Nations. And earlier this year in June, he did speak at the meeting in Kigali, Rwanda. And he did express then that nations had the right to become republics and not to have the king as the head of states. That was legally their right. And that he personally had, personal sorrow for the legacies and the contributions of Britain to slavery. So, he's only become king. The ascension was yesterday, and I believe that we should give him a chance to see where this goes. There might be some effect from the colonial era that could affect the Commonwealth, but I think it's too soon for us to make that acclamation. But at the same time, I'm absolutely certain that his work over the last 50 years with the Prince's Trust and the Duchy of Cornwall, his environmental work, climate change, all of those things speak volumes, and we probably will see more of that. And it's absolutely apropos at this time in the world, given the things that we're living through.
All right. Finally, before I let you go, I would like to find out what lessons do you think Nigeria can draw from the life of Queen Elizabeth? Sorry about that.
Oh, that's quite all right. Queen Elizabeth. Well, I would say that the lessons all of us can draw, not just Nigeria, is one of purpose and intention, being dedicated to humanity, living impactful lives, taking actionable steps in what we do, doing the right thing at all times, not because we want to be recognized publicly, but because we have this deep sense of fulfillment within us. Having the ability to adapt to change. I mean, if you're alive, then you're going to experience change. And I think the Queen demonstrated that immensely throughout her life, showing empathy and compassion towards others and respect for nature and life. But I think most importantly is a legacy of prosperity, because at the end of the day, it's one thing to have been here, but to make a difference with your life and to impact change and impact the lives of others because you care, because you love them just as much as you love yourself is most important. And she will be sorely missed.
All right. Thank you very much for your contribution, Dr. Amma Oyerima.
Thank you for honoring the legacy of Her Majesty the Queen. God save the King.
All right. Now let's take a short break and Newsweek continues in a moment. Stay with us. You're welcome back, and it's still Newsweek, where we discuss the biggest stories that made the headlines in the week. Let's turn our attention to Nigeria, where the Department of State Services, DSS, raided the residence and office of Tukur Mamu following his arrest at the Aminu Kano International Airport on Wednesday. Mamu was involved in negotiation for the release of some of the hostage abducted in the March train attack in Kaduna. TVC News correspondent Lupe Asom reports.
Government, as a people, as organizations, we must take it seriously.
Mamu Tukur's role as lead negotiator has resulted in the release of 40 out of the 63 passengers kidnapped by terrorists on the 28th of March. But on Wednesday morning, there were widespread reports of his arrest in Egypt. Mr. Mamu Tukur is also the media aide to Kaduna-based Islamic cleric Sheikh Ahmed Gumi and publisher of Desert Herald newspaper. Sources reveal he was immediately detained by the Interpol at the Cairo International Airport. This, they say, happened while he was waiting for a connecting flight to Saudi Arabia with his family, his alleged destination for the Lesser Hajj. In the last 4 years, communities and schools in Kaduna State have been in the direct line of fire by terrorists and armed bandits. The contributed the attack to ISWAP terrorists moving into the state from the northeast, and he had advocated for them to be bombed to death. But Mr. Mamu had been vocal about his opinion of the use of non-kinetic measures in addressing this challenge. He has also led the negotiation processes when people were abducted and raised his voice when similar attacks occurred in other states. Reactions to his role have been mixed, and many have questioned who he is and what he represents. But those he has helped out of captivity have at different times gone to thank him at his Kaduna residence. In the aftermath of the Kuje prison break, Mr. Tukur revealed that he had warned the federal government of the possibilities of such attacks. He also revealed the train abductors' demand for a swap of the victims with their colleagues and children who were in the custody of the military. There are claims that Mr. Mamu's arrest may not be unconnected with others from the federal government of Nigeria. Residents of Kaduna are also reluctant to air their views on an issue they fear may be tricky and beyond what is seen on the surface. It was also gathered that Mamu is expected to arrive at Aminu Kano International Airport in Kano on Wednesday afternoon. Lupe Asom, TVC News, Kaduna.
Well, joining me in the studio for more discussion on this is a political analyst and rights activist, Olufemi Lawson.
Good evening, Vicente.
Thank you for coming on the show. Now, Nigerian authorities were not doing enough over the release of this victim, and that's exactly how Mamu came to the limelight. And the question is, did you see, or how do you see his arrest?
On one hand, the arrest is inevitable, it's necessary, and I think it's important, particularly when you look at the point we have gotten to as a country in the war against terrorism. But on the other hand, it also serves as an opportunity to also expose the weakness of our national security architecture. On the first hand, I mean commendable because you cannot, for God's sake, just assume that one individual, a non-state actor, is playing roles with so much audacity, to the extent that, it could interface freely, with terrorists. It could at some point give ultimatum on behalf of terrorists concerning hostages and the likes. But on the other hand, like I said, it's an exposure of the failure of our national security because as a country, we have to rely on characters like Mamu to actually know the state of hostages, the level of terrorist attacks, and sometimes get information about the likelihood of terrorist attacks. Of course, if you recall, if you follow these activities, he has spoken about, of course, the likelihood of the invasion of Kuje correctional facilities, which, of course, he eventually confirmed after the attack. And these are, fundamental issues of how well this country has really taken the business of national security. Because why would a state empower a non-state actor to the extent that not only is he interfacing between families of victims of terrorism, but also became a media personality to the extent that he practically issues statements on behalf of these groups. And the country was looking so helpless. The security authorities were behaving as if we're in a normal situation. So it's commendable that he has been arrested, but at the same time, we should also agree that it was a fundamental failure of our national security for such characters to have been elevated to the point that they could be playing that role.
All right, some relatives of the remaining victims, the abducted train passengers, accusing the government of making this arrest in a hasty manner, saying it could jeopardize the release of their loved ones. Let me have your thought on this.
You cannot really blame them. They are really in a desperate situation. And you see, it's an indictment, and I'll keep saying this, that citizens have to repose more confidence in a non-state actor, in a character that is running an enterprise with the terrorist organizations, than the state, which ordinarily should be responsible for their security. It is ordinarily expected of the states, the Nigerian states, to give assurances to these families about how soon they can be reunited with their loved ones who are in captivity. But it looks like the state has become so helpless, and families have to rely on non-state actors like Mamu. And you see, you cannot also blame this on some of the department of our state security, because they have limits to their roles. They have roles to play as far as getting hostages rescued and the likes are concerned. But the truth is that where is the national security advisor in all this? Who ordinarily, primarily, should be playing such roles like that characters like Mamu and Co are playing?
All right. Thank you very much for your contribution so far, Mr. Lawson, as usual. But let me put you hold on that, so we'll get to move to our last story for tonight. While we go down to that issue, the Minister of Education, Adamu, says the federal government can only afford 23.5% salary increase for university workers and 35% for professors. This was part of the fallout of the meeting in Abuja between government, pro-chancellors and vice-chancellors of federal universities aimed at finding lasting solutions to the ongoing strike by the Academic Staff Union of Universities, ASUU. TVC News correspondent Helen Osamade Akent reports.
For the past 6 months, students of Nigeria's public universities have been at home following the inability of the federal government and the academic staff union of universities to reach an agreement. In its effort to resolve the strike, the federal government set up the NIMI Breaks Committee to look into the 2009 federal government ASUU agreements, but the committee's report was rejected. The federal government's decision to introduce the policy of no work, no pay made the union to extend its strike indefinitely.
Academic Staff Union of Universities.
Today, the Ministry of Education meets with vice-chancellors and pro-chancellors of federal universities. The outcome of the meeting is the setting up of a 14-man committee to look into areas where government has failed to reach a consensus with the union. Although no time frame is given as to when the committee is expected to come up with its reports, the government has promised that all grey areas will soon be resolved and lecturers will in no time resume work.
Even Briggs himself is part of this committee. Nobody has shown it. It is in continuation of what the Briggs committee did, the offers that were made, what was accepted by ASUU and what was not accepted. It's a continuation of the Briggs committee.
We're on quick march towards early resolution of the problem. And in a very little while, the doors of our universities, those that are closed, will be open.
The committee is made up of pro-chancellors, vice-chancellors and heads of government agencies.
No member of the Academic Staff Union of Universities is represented in this committee, which will be chaired by the Minister of Education. The committee is expected to submit the outcome of its report to President Muhammadu Buhari for further action. Helen Osamede Akins, TVC News, Abuja.
Well, I still have in the studio political analyst and rights activist Olufemi Lawson. Quickly before we go, because we are out of time, right? Minister of Education Adamu Adamu believes the proposed salary increases is unrealistic. Is even out of tune with the current economic crisis or situation.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think to start with, the minister's attempt to elevate a minor issue above the major issues on the ongoing crisis is not really so good because, of course, I'm not sure it is the issue of salary increase for lecturers that is the major component of the agreement. And we must begin to query the sincerity of government on this issue. The minister just set up a 14-man committee, including pro-chancellors, vice-chancellors, members of some institutions, and no member of the union that you're in dispute with is on that panel of 14. And you see, we cannot continue to set up committees after committees. The Ministry of Labour spent a lot of months addressing this issue. So many committees in the past, the Briggs Committee, and for how long are we going to be setting up committee to discuss an agreement that has been reached over 13 years ago? Why not move to the stage of implementation? This was an agreement between two parties, the government and the union. Why continually creating committees which will eventually not lead us out of this current situation? I think the government must, for once, be sincere in its approach at solving this issue. For God's sake, you cannot keep the students at home for over 7 months and continue to set up committees. So the government must look beyond setting up committees and look at implementing some of this agreement. It has also confirmed and agreed to do. The minister in the last meeting said from the first quarter, the government will be releasing 150 billion as part of the, of course, agreement and 50 for remunerations. And the question is, why do we have to wait for the first quarter of 2023? In the same country where in less than 2 hours, the National Assembly approved a supplementary budget of about $1 billion for the military to procure arms and ammunition. Why are we so relegating education and we are not really seeing the closure of our universities for 7 months as a national emergency? It is very, very unfortunate. And I think where we are now, it's not the time to keep setting up more committees and committees, than rather the government should move to the stage of implementation and look at how it can begin to implement the content of this agreement that was not made by us, but by both parties. Of course.
All right, in a minute, Lawson, before we go, what do you think would take for a resolution to be reached as soon as possible in resolving this crisis?
It's very straightforward. Federal government must begin an implementation of its agreement with ASUU, and if government will seek a review, it's not going to be achieved by setting up some committees that does not involve ASUU. Federal government must be ready to sit with ASUU and look at areas of, soft landing for both parties, and let these universities be reopened.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Lawson. Femi, thank you for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure.
And thank you for being part of the show as well. And that's our show for today. Remember, you can follow the conversation on our social media platform at TVC News NG or on our website at tvcnews.tv. I am Jacinta Obiuku. Until next week, it's goodbye.